A 2-year-old girl is reported missing in Alabama, leading to an intense, weeks-long manhunt.
This investigation involved approximately 8,000 combined working hours, with personnel often working 16 to 18 hours per day.
And this week, a devastating breakthrough.
The evidence shows that Adrienne Reid killed her 2-year-old daughter. She literally threw her in the trash.
As the young girl's mom remains behind bars, investigators continue to piece together what went wrong.
And then she engaged in a 53-day-long campaign of deceit, lies, manipulation, and as previously stated, destruction of evidence, before she finally made her false report on February 16th.
We're on The Case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Hey guys, real quick, I want to tell you about this app that you're really going to love. It's called Upside. It gets you cash back. We're talking extra cash back, real money on everyday purchases like gas, groceries, and takeout. So here's what you do. You download Upside. It's free. Then you claim an offer at one of their 100,000 plus locations. And then you pay like you typically would with your card. Then you verify the purchase and you get money back. So I use it. Say I need gas. Maybe I'm doing takeout one night. I'll search for offers on Upside. Then after I spend, money appears in my app, and then I just transfer it straight to my bank. Upside's frequent users earn an average of $254 back a year. Real money. So to start getting your cash back, click the link in the description or scan the QR code and use promo code OTC to get an extra 25 cents bonus on every gallon on your first tank of gas. A case spanning nearly a month reaches a major breakthrough. Adrienne Reid of Enterprise, Alabama, is now charged with capital murder and abuse of a corpse in the death of her own 2-year-old daughter, Genesis Reid. She was reported missing back in February. Now, Adrienne Reid was already in jail when these charges came through on Monday, but it was for a different reason. And when you look at how things turned out so far, it just makes the situation look that much worse for the 33-year-old mom. And there's still missing pieces to the puzzle here. Will an alleged motive ever come to light? Genesis is still missing. Will we ever find her body? And why did it take weeks for her disappearance to reach the attention of law enforcement? So let's break down what we know thus far. This case began back on February 16th when police in Enterprise, Alabama received a chilling report.
Adrienne Reid reported her child missing at 3:10 a.m., stating that Genesis walked out the front door.
As horrible as it sounds, this type of situation could happen to anyone. A small child gaining access to an unlocked door and then wandering off in a matter of seconds. But in this particular case, police were suspicious right off the bat.
A thorough precursor search in the area did not result in any helpful leads of where Genesis had gone, and inconsistencies in Adrienne's story resulted in more intense investigation. The father of Genesis, grandmother, other family members, and those that knew Genesis were contacted through the investigation and had been very cooperative with law enforcement. Mariah, a person of interest but not a suspect, was generated through Adrienne, who gave very little to no assistance on how to contact Mariah.
In a missing persons case, especially involving a young child, it is natural for investigators to speak with family members. And while most of them were reportedly cooperative with the situation, the police said that Adrienne had inconsistencies in her story, and she gave a lead to a suspect with no way to contact them.
Although we are still investigating the whereabouts of Genesis, we are confident that Adrienne made a false report that Genesis walked out of his apartment at 3 a.m. in the morning. Through the investigation, there's enough probable cause that has led to the arrest of Adrienne. Adrienne Reid has been charged with false reporting to local law enforcement authorities, a Class C felony due to the report alleging imminent danger to a person.
A day after Adrienne reports her daughter missing, she is arrested and booked into the Coffee County Jail on a false reporting charge with an allegation of imminent injury to a person. And at this point, police say Adrienne has become a primary suspect in the 2-year-old's disappearance, but no additional charges were filed at that time. So 2 days after that report comes in, we're at February 18th, Adrienne made her first appearance in court.
During the hearing, Judge Wilson heard testimony from an Enterprise Police Department detective regarding facts and circumstances related to the current investigation into the disappearance of Genesis Reid. Based on the testimony, the state argued that Adrienne Reid is the only known suspect in the disappearance of Genesis Reid. Adrienne Reid has hidden and or destroyed evidence relevant to this case, and Adrienne Reid is a flight risk should she be released from custody. The standard bond schedule for a Class C felony in Alabama is $2,500 to $15,000. The state argued that the bond schedule amounts in this matter for a Class C felony are wholly unreasonable. We asked for a $1 million cash-only bond.
The judge grants the prosecutor's request, and Adrienne is held in jail on $1 million cash-only bond. That is a massive amount of money for a Class C felony in Alabama. But like the prosecutor said, when you look at the circumstances in this case, there's no one else investigators are looking at when it comes to the disappearance of Genesis. And there is still a lot to uncover, including when Genesis actually disappeared.
We are specifically requesting that anyone who had any type of personal relationship or social interaction with Adrienne Reid between December 24th, 2025 and February 16th, 2026, please come forward.
Remember, Genesis was reported missing on February 16th, but now police are asking for information spanning back to December. According to a Facebook post from the Enterprise Police Department, quote, as the investigation progressed, detectives conducted multiple interviews and determined the child had not been seen in several weeks. Now, at this point, the situation is becoming even more critical. When Adrienne originally reported her daughter missing, she allegedly vanished that same morning. But it's now alleged by police that Genesis could have been missing for a month and a half. And that is a much larger window of time and one that could severely impact this investigation.
Please know that we continue to investigate every lead and pursue every possible avenue in our efforts to bring resolution to this case. This includes ongoing witness interviews as well as detailed analysis of electronic devices and surveillance footage. Our commitment to locating Genesis and bringing her home remains unwavering. If you have any information about Genesis, or you have Genesis, now's the time to come forward. Our investigators are methodically reviewing every lead. If you're involved in this case and choose not to come forward, be assured that we will identify you and pursue prosecution to the fullest extent of the law.
The search for 2-year-old Genesis continued for several weeks with the assistance of multiple agencies, including the FBI, the U.S. Marshals, Alabama Law Enforcement Agency, and even neighboring states. And despite the massive search effort, she was still nowhere to be found. But on Monday, which, by the way, was Genesis's 3rd birthday, police held a news conference and announced a major breakthrough in this case.
March 9th, 2026, Adrienne Reid, the mother of Genesis Reid, had been formally charged with capital murder for the killing of a child under the age of 14 and abuse of a corpse.
In some ways, you could describe this part of the investigation as bittersweet from law enforcement, because it is safe to say in a case like this, the hope is that Genesis would be found alive. But when you factor in her mom's arrest, the alleged disappearance timeline spanning back further than anticipated, and a large-scale search with no results, Genesis's death was an unfortunate possibility. So, how did law enforcement reach this conclusion? The Enterprise Police Chief shared the chilling details.
As investigators continued to follow leads and interview witnesses, information emerged indicating that Genesis had not been seen with Adrienne since Christmas Day. Through the careful and methodical work of investigators, we have reached a heartbreaking and horrific conclusion that her mother, her caretaker, the one that should have been there to keep her safe, willfully murdered Genesis and placed her in a duffel bag and discarded her in a dumpster. Today, March 9th, 2026, Adrienne Reid, the mother of Genesis Reid, had been formally charged with capital murder for the killing of a child under the age of 14 and abuse of a corpse. The last confirmed contact with family members occurred on December 25th, when Genesis visited relatives in Dothan for the Christmas holiday. That evening, she was returned to her residence in Enterprise with her mother. During the investigations, detectives obtained camera footage from a neighboring residence showing Adrienne walking toward the apartment complex dumpster with a rolling duffel bag at approximately 11:30 p.m. on Christmas night. 2 days later, additional footage captured Adrienne returning to the dumpster area carrying toys and other belongings belonging to Genesis.
Now, the allegations in this case that we've just learned this week, they're horrific. An alleged murder on Christmas night of a 2-year-old child reportedly thrown in a dumpster by her own mom. And that same mom then reports her missing nearly 7 weeks later. It's hard to imagine. But remember, Adrienne Reid is presumed innocent until guilty. And there is a big piece of the puzzle still missing.
The investigation is far from over. Our focus now turns to bringing Genesis home to the community that loved her. The search and rescue process will be long and difficult, but our resolve remains unwavering. We will continue working until Genesis is brought home.
This landfill is over 100 acres of working space, but that does not deter us in any form or fashion. So as the investigation continued, we can proudly say that we narrowed it down between 200 and 100 feet square. I want to ask the public to keep praying for us. This is going to take a while. I'm going to ask you for your patience. We are determined to find her.
According to Coffee County Sheriff Scott Bird, the excavation process in the Coffee County landfill will begin this week with assistance from experts in Atlanta. But Bird said the search could take up to 10 weeks or more, especially given the nature of how many times the alleged duffel bag carrying Genesis's body was compacted before it reached the landfill. Now, finding Genesis's remains, it is important because it gives investigators a better understanding, potentially, of how she died, when she died, and above all, it gives that confirmation that she did die beyond circumstantial evidence in this case. So we're going to continue monitoring this search for Genesis closely, and we'll give you the latest information when it comes in. But in the meantime, when it comes to the legal process for Adrienne Reid, she is due for an initial appearance later in the week on her new felony charges, capital murder and abuse of a corpse. And at that hearing, she is also expected to be held without bond. During this week's news conference, Coffee County District Attorney James Tarbox also spoke on the potential punishment that this 33-year-old mom could face.
Under Alabama law, if we are successful in our prosecution for capital murder and Adrienne Reid is convicted, there are 2 possible punishments for a jury to decide: life without the possibility of parole or the death penalty. During the court proceedings of this case, our office will have to formally elect whether we are seeking the death penalty. I am committed at that time to fully evaluating the case file and evidence before making a final decision on the death penalty. However, I am formally announcing today that based upon everything I know at this point about this case, this is having been with our officers, our deputies, and our agents for most of this investigation, day in and day out since February 16th, our office will be seeking the death penalty in this case. The evidence shows that Adrienne Reid killed her 2-year-old daughter. She literally threw her in the trash. And then she engaged in a 53-day long campaign of deceit, lies, manipulation, and as previously stated, destruction of evidence, before she finally made her false report on February 16th. Her conduct speaks for itself, and I believe this preliminary decision to seek the death penalty conforms to our community's beliefs about this case and our shared values about how we value and seek to protect the most innocent among us, our children.
So the Coffee County District Attorney says that he plans to pursue the death penalty against Adrienne Reid, although it appears the decision is not legally set in stone just yet. It's important to remember with death penalty cases, a conviction does not automatically mean the death sentence. And in Alabama and most other jurisdictions, the trial is separated into a guilt phase, and then you have the penalty phase. A jury will first have to determine if the defendant is guilty of capital murder. Then the jury will be presented additional evidence in a separate proceeding before deciding if the defendant will receive life in prison without parole or whether they will be put to death. We're going to continue monitoring Adrienne's upcoming hearing for more updates on how this all plays out. But the sad truth is that no amount of justice, no punishment could ever bring back the precious life of a 2-year-old girl who the community worked so tirelessly for to try and bring home safely, but the community now working tirelessly to make sure she is not forgotten.
This is a very sad day for all of us, not just here in Enterprise, but across the country, our county, state, and beyond. I want to thank the law enforcement community and the many agencies who have worked so tirelessly on this case at every level. I am grateful for the support we have received from neighbors, friends, and people everywhere who have offered help, encouragement, and prayers. From the very start, our thoughts and our hearts have been with Genesis, and we have lifted up this little girl in our prayer. Now it is time to see that justice is done for her and to bring some measures of peace and closure to everyone who has cared so deeply. May God continue to watch over our community and give us strength as we move forward.
Joining us now to talk more about this investigation is retired detective commander with the Chicago Police Department, Will Svilar. Always great to have you on Law and Crime, even for stories as horrific as the one that we're talking about here. In this case, they don't have Genesis Reid's body, but this mom is now facing Adrienne Reid. She is facing a capital murder charge. How do you build a case if you don't have, sadly, that physical piece of evidence of the body in a murder case?
Well, you don't have that physical piece of evidence, but in order to build a murder case and to charge a murder case without a body, you need extensive evidence, circumstantial and physical, and also maybe even a statement from the mom. So everything they did inside the house, around the house, we're talking about hours of physical evidence that you're trying to collect, DNA evidence, anything you can find. One, we know the girl's gone. The girl's not supposed to be gone. And why is she gone? And when's the last time somebody saw her? So they had to do tons of background investigation before they came to that charge.
Because you're going from, in some cases where, a child is missing for a long period of time, and you can charge a parent. I'm sure there's an array of charges that they can face just for the fact that the child is not where the child should be and nobody knows where the child is. But how much of a leap is it to then get to the point where you're saying that this child is no longer alive? And you have proof of that without a body.
Pretty big leap. Again, but you're talking about a 3-year-old, a kid who would have been 3 years old. They can't really sustain themselves for very long without help, right? They can't get very far. They don't walk very far. You can make an assumption if a kid's gone a certain amount of time, that this kid's no longer alive. In this case, I think they charge a mom with making a false report initially. That's maybe to get her out of the house, get your search warrants written, and now find your evidence inside the house to suggest that this baby is no longer alive and that this person's responsible. So it's a leap, but these kids, little babies and toddlers, cannot survive long on their own.
And when it comes to the initial charge that she faced, it was a Class C felony, still serious, but it was a felony charge. And then she was given a bond of $1 million cash. And clearly, you look at this case, she is the suspect, but they were still building their case. I mean, what are the conversations like, between the prosecutors where the judge kind of knows going in that more is coming, as opposed to a judge looking at it just kind of within its own little silo and saying, okay, this is the charge and this is typically what the bond is going to be?
The prosecutors pretty much laid out what they had to the judge. Basically gave the judge enough ammo to now a judge can set whatever bond he wants, he or she wants. The judge gets to set the bond. There's no limit to the bond that can be set. It's up to the judge. It's not like sentencing where there's sentencing guidelines. Mm-hmm. So the judge, I'm sure, had a pretty good idea of what was going on, and that $1 million bond suggests that he or she did not want her out on the street.
It seemed like Adrienne Reid, the mom, was the suspect from the very beginning. For the detectives in this case, you have a mom that comes into the station, the precinct, and says, my kid is missing. They just happen to walk out the front door. I guess, how do you approach those initial conversations, and how soon, and it seems like it was pretty soon in this case, do you get that sense that something more is going on here than a missing child?
You can tell by sometimes body language. You can tell by the way some of the things people say. But when you start with the timeline, okay, when's the last time you saw the baby? Where could this baby be? And we're talking about not a kid who's missing coming home from school, a baby who's in the house all the time. So initially, just part of a missing persons investigation, you're going to want to go back to the house and search around the house. So, early on with the questioning of the mom, or the mom comes in to make her complaint, or whoever comes in to make the complaint, that, like I said earlier, this baby can't survive by itself. So this baby, there's something going on in this house. You initially go back to the house, you establish a timeline, and breaks in her timeline or stories that change. It gives you a general idea.
It's a really hard part of this story to talk. I mean, it's all hard to talk about, but this is just kind of that morbid part of it where we go. And it seems like there's a search that's happening at a landfill, trying to find evidence, trying to find this child. What goes into, I mean, you just imagine a massive area, this is where people put their trash, and sadly they're looking for the body of a little girl. How does that typically go for law enforcement, and how you go through something like that and try to find the evidence you're looking for?
Well, the landfills are big. I don't know what it's like down there, but our landfills are massive here in Illinois, in the Chicago area. So you have to figure out who picked up the dumpster. What route is it on? How many days a week is it picked up? Where does it go? How many stops before? How many stops after? When did this truck download or unload the refuse? So you try to find a zone where it got dumped in, and you start zone by zone. And they're looking for a duffel bag that they believe the baby's in. So, that's, I don't want to say it's an advantage, but, you could have dumped tons of garbage on top of this between now and then. They say that this baby's been missing, hasn't been seen since Christmas. So that search is going to be exhausting.
How do you handle that timeline? I mean, knowing that this goes all the way back potentially to December, like what's the evidence that you're trying to gather? Or it's not just a couple of weeks. I mean, we're going back to last year.
So once, you're trying to find evidence of the crime. Okay. So that crime, did it happen? Nobody saw this baby since Christmas, but February she comes in and reports she's missing. You got to talk to a bunch of people, like who normally would see this baby, who else lives in the house, if anyone. Where's the father? Where's the grandparents? When can they help you piece together this timeline? Because the timeline's important. Is the baby killed right after Christmas? Is the baby killed around New Year's? Most of that evidence is going to be at the crime scene where the baby was killed, and I believe that to be the house. Now, as far as, you have videos showing when she was wheeling the dumpster. From that date, you have that date. So you got to assume probably the murder happens shortly before she's wheeling this duffel bag to the dumpster. So it's all about the timeline, and it's narrowing down your search, because if you don't narrow it down, it could be weeks, months before you can find this poor little girl.
As you're building your case and you're starting to get that sense that this mom is not telling the truth, like Adrienne Reid is accused of not telling the truth and doing so much more. I mean, what's the conversation like with her? Are you letting her on that she's a suspect in this case?
It's when you deal with baby deaths, and I've dealt with more than I care to talk about, but when you deal with baby deaths, you understand one thing. This baby did not sustain this injury by an accident, and one of the adults or bigger people in this house caused it. So that's, again, why your timeline is so important. Like in all investigations and in all interrogations, you try to give somebody an out. You let them know what you know, some of what you know, but you let them talk. You try to give them an out. I mean, I had a couple of cases where I know that this parent killed this baby. And I had little kids, and you come in and you say, oh man, if I'm up here exhausted, I'm sorry, because my kids kept me up all night. They drove me nuts. So now you try to establish the fact that, okay, maybe he'll understand when I tell him what I did. So it's give and take, and it's person by person too.
And in this case, it just, it gets to the point where they're going to go for a capital murder charge against her. Certainly a decision by the prosecutor to go that route, but how much are you involved as a detective when it comes to building a case and knowing that it potentially could be a death penalty case, and you want to make sure that the prosecutor has the evidence that they would need to get that high level charge?
In my entire career, because we did, memorandum on the death penalty, in my entire career, I had one death penalty case. And it is extensive, because when you decide to go to the death penalty or to ask for the death penalty, there are a whole bunch of hearings and there's appeals before you even start the trial. So for them to say it's a capital murder case, and I don't know how it works down there, but for them to say it's a capital murder case, they have to have strong evidence now. And the final piece of that puzzle is going to be the baby. But they don't necessarily need the baby if they have that strong of evidence.
Yeah, and you hope for the closure of all of it, and certainly to build the case that they'll be able to make some sort of discovery. Though it doesn't make anything any better. We don't have a motive in this case either. How important is that part of it to understand the why as to why she would allegedly do this?
So, and I've had them both ways where there's a sudden incident that happens and they panic and they cause harm to the baby that causes the baby's death. But more often than not, what we see, and you need the body for this, is years, months, weeks of physical abuse, of neglect, where you can see it in the remains of a pattern of abuse. And then finally, your little bodies just can't take it anymore. It could be that. It could be a sudden and intense thing where there's a liver laceration and the poor baby bleeds out. But more often than not, you see a pattern and you see healed scars and you see burns and healed bones. And finally, these poor little babies just can't handle anymore.
When you have that in some cases, and again, we don't have it in this one because they don't have the body at this point, but if you have that forensic evidence in some of these cases, like how much does the jury need to know, oh, the mom was upset that night, or the mom had a substance abuse issue? I don't know if that's the case in this one, but there's that particular why in this case. I mean, do you need to have that to present to a jury?
Well, that's on their side of the table. That's on the other table, the defense table. They're going to have to come up with mitigating factors as to why this happened. We have to prove it did happen and that she caused it. Now, your mental state comes into your defense, or if you're going for an insanity defense or something along those lines. The prosecution has to prove the case happened and this person did it. So that's a defense question where, is there an insanity thing? And that could be something that comes down to a plea or something like that, or takes the death penalty off the table.
Yeah, and we'll see if there's leverage there for prosecutors if they want to go for a plea deal, or if they're in a case where they want to go all the way through and see Adrienne Reid held to the fullest extent of the law. We'll see what happens next. Retired Detective Commander with the Chicago Police Department, Will Svilar. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Chris.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify, and we're also now streaming on Peacock. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.